All right. Well, here we are, folks, with another session of the Foreign Book Club. We may finish the book this time, or we may not. It kind of depends on who says what and for how long they say it. This is a wonderful book by Robert Carl Seurat. The day is now far spent. We believe that we came to the last chapter of part 3, which is chapter 16, Religious Liberty. And after all the doom and gloom, and I would say very insightful critique of problems in the church, in our society, in the human heart, we're going to go on to part 4, Rediscovering Hope, the Practice of the Christian Virtues. So let's start in with chapter 16, Religious Liberty. Anybody want to begin?
I have the 288.
Well, before 288, then, if I may, I would like to point out that this question for religious liberty, the interviewer, Diot, gives a quote from Benedict XVI about freedom of religion in the U.S. And so this whole discussion starts with religious freedom as it has been protected and experienced in the United States. And I just thought that was, after all of this bashing of the West, it was nice to, not that we don't have problems with religious liberty also in understanding what it is, but nevertheless, it was nice to be reminded that America was a flourishing place for religious freedom.
And it's true that we saw last session, I believe, that his great appreciation, respect, and gratitude for colonization, which brought him culture, Christianity, and a language and a literature which he didn't have before. So he's not an opponent of the West. He's not hostile to the West, but as someone with fresh eyes, it seems to me that he's looking at what we're best at, what's been our best, and he sees where we're failing from that, you know.
Right, where we need a purification or a polishing. Joseph, you said you had a quote on 288?
Right at the top of page 288, I think a timeless lesson that the Cardinal teaches us here. The kingdom of God will never be established on earth. The more a political society forgets this, the more it presents itself as the unsurpassable horizon, the more totalitarian it becomes. So I think that he talks about Nazism and communism immediately after that. But I think the key thing is here that we need to realize that we're fallen individuals. There's going to be no perfect human society. That politics is going to be messy, and without the practice of virtue, it's going to be tyrannical. And I think it was Mahatma Gandhi that said that we can't dream of systems so perfect that no one needs to be good. In other words, in the absence of virtue, there will only be tyranny. So you can't have systems, ideological systems, that will replace virtue.
And the American founders understood that, and they took the fallenness of the world as a given, which is why they set up the polity the way they did. And but it is interesting to see how people can turn that into an ideology and try to spread America's model everywhere as if it were some perfect fit for everywhere.
Well, I do think the key thing here, though, and I love it, again, same page halfway down, Christians will always be a thorn in the flesh for these soft or hard totalitarianisms.
Yes.
Christians ceaselessly recall that we are not made for this world. Our fatherland is found in heaven. And that's important because if we invest ourselves in the world, we will basically become tyrants that are trying to make perfect systems, and we will crush anybody. You know, what does it matter if you exterminate a whole generation of Jews if you're going to set up a 1,000-year Reich? A 1,000-year civilization is a small price to pay. What does it matter if you kill all of the middle class, all the kulaks in the Soviet Union? You kill one class for one generation to have a perfect society in the future. It's a small price to pay. So that as soon as we actually forget that our home is in heaven, and this is a vale of tears, and invest ourselves in the world, we become those that commit atrocities on our neighbors.
Well, invest ourselves in the world. We all have to invest ourselves a little bit, but I think the danger is if you think this world is all there is, and that man's project here is to turn this into heaven on earth, then you've got problems.
Well, Joseph, you quoted a brief passage above and below what I was going to quote. And so I'll take these two slices of bread that you have given and put the meat in the sandwich.
Okay.
And quote what's in the middle of them.
Oh, you can take the Via Media, Father, as you always do.
Page 288. It's very lonely in the middle, you know. Especially, you know, this is a historical broadcast. We're very close to a palindrome year, which hasn't happened for 900 years. That is, yesterday the Feast of Purification, or the presentation, was 02/02/2020. That's not happened since 11/11/11/11, November 11th, 11/11. You know, we had it yesterday, but in American politics today, there seems to be no via media. It's just sad. It's hard to see this going on, that there seems to be so little desire to see the other person's point of view and cooperate. But anyway, in the via media here in the middle of the sandwich on page 288, Carlos Straw says, I want to recall forcefully what Benedict XVI said. There's profound relationship between the communist mirage, the Nazi madness, and democratic liberalism as we know it today. Now, those are fighting words. He continues, these three ideologies resemble each other in several fundamental points. They claim to reduce man's happiness at will or by force. Communism and Nazism invented the extermination camps. Democratic liberal ideology makes use of persecution by media and indoctrination from the earliest childhood. And then comes your quote. So, I mean, it may seem pretty harsh that he's comparing democratic liberalism as we know it today with communism and Nazism.
Yeah, but I think he lets the democratic liberalism off the hook somewhat, because he doesn't mention in this about the systematic infanticide which has been promoted by this liberalism, which has killed millions of unborn children. He's let them off the hook there, because that's an extermination on par with the Nazis and the communists.
Right. So on 289, at the very top, he says, a society that refuses to be founded on the objective good turns into a dictatorship of emptiness. Another
great phrase, dictatorship of emptiness.
Yeah, there are a lot of dictatorships in this book. But the point is that and here's where all these ideologies, Nazism, communism, and liberalism as we know it today, are one. And that is, if there isn't a higher objective truth, then power is simply will. And law becomes simply what people can impose by force, whether that's a majority rule situation of force or whether that's a party that has total power. But there's no longer the appeal to reason. There's no longer the appeal to natural law. There's no longer an idea. There's objective truth. Then it's just will to power. And that's what we're seeing can happen even in a majority-run democracy.
Well, and that's why Americans pride themselves on saying we are a government of laws, not of men.
Right.
Because men can exercise their will, but
that's right.
Laws stand above the will of man.
Or they're supposed to.
They're supposed to. But that is difficulty when we don't accept laws other than positive law that we make by the majority.
Right.
That are not applications of the eternal law and the natural law in man's heart. You know, once law becomes merely a question of human will, independent of a higher norm,
that's right.
Then, of course, we get oppression one kind or the other.
That's right. And I'd like to draw our attention to 290, where he states this again in a slightly different way. A state that abandons the determination of the law to the fluctuations of majorities runs the severe risk of turning into a band of robbers. And I would like to point out, and to the cardinal too, you know, America was at this crossroads before. The Lincoln-Douglas debates before the Civil War were precisely on this question. Does the majority get to determine the law in the South and keep blacks enslaved just because they're black? Or is there a higher law that can prove that a law, even if it was brought into being by majority, is unjust and therefore overturned? And that's what the Lincoln-Douglas debates were all about. And so our country has had this conversation before. I'm sorry that we keep forgetting it. And we need to be reminded to go back to these important questions.
But if I can be the alien in the midst here, who is a U.S. citizen, I hasten to add. But to go back to the dictatorship of emptiness as a phrase, I think the point is that if God is removed, then we have the vacuum. If God's there, then we have a society of virtue. God is removed, the vacuum becomes vicious. Basically, vacuity is viciousness. Dictatorship of emptiness. That's the key here. It's universally applicable in the United States, but in France, in Africa, and anywhere else where there are human people.
Also, to go a little below what you quoted, Vivian, I mean, to show that he's not opposed to democracy as such, he says in the middle of the page there, 290, I do appreciate the democratic form of government because it gives each person the opportunity to realize his free responsibility in society. But it does not bear within itself the foundation of a genuine law. A society that is democratic in form needs some content, law, the good. Otherwise, it is organized around nothingness. It goes back to that same
So that's the vacuity again. It's organized around nothingness.
Basically, having a society that's not rooted in God, but in the will of man. Where does political power ultimately reside? It resides in God. So one nation under God, or any other version of monarchy, what have you, the king has to be under God. And I think the key issue here about democracy is that, that from a Catholic perspective, we talk in terms of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is where political freedom resides, and subsidiarity is the freedom of the family from interference from the mob, as well as from the rich or the government or anything else. The family has to be free, freedom in the family. That's subsidiarity, which I would argue is ultimately democratic, because that's where democracy has its roots, in the family. That's where it springs from. That's what maintains it. Once you have destruction of the family, you have destruction of democracy, you have nothing but tyranny. So if you want to preserve freedom, you have to preserve the family. Therefore, the roots of democracy is in subsidiarity.
Yes, subsidiarity. But what happens if you destroy the family and don't have any families? You've got single-parent families. You've got orphan children, or children who are effectively orphans. No parents, don't even know who the parents are. I mean, I agree that the fundamental cell of society is the family, and subsidiarity in the Catholic view, even in democratic society, must give the family priority over the state. The state is for the family, not the family for the state. But when you no longer have mom, dad, uncle, aunt, but just individuals who don't even know their parents, what do you do then? Well, the state then must, I'm afraid, substitute for the family. And that's what we have, the nanny state, so to speak, that replaces, substitute for what the natural, structure is, to have a man and a woman married, having children. And
I agree completely. But the consequence is that what we have, obviously time will play this out. It may be beyond our time, but what we're moving towards is an unsustainable society. When the family breaks down, society breaks down, it's going to be messy and horrible. And from the ashes, something healthier, which will be something more traditional, will re-emerge, because it's the only thing that works.
Well, I would like to bring us back to the title of this chapter is Religious Liberty. So how does religious liberty play into a democratic society? Why is that important? It's important because human beings have to be free to search for the truth. And he says here on the bottom of page 291, man must freely discover and put into practice these objective norms that are, so to speak, the grammar of our human nature. And but if you give people liberty, but take away from them the confidence that there is anything like truth to be discovered, then their liberty becomes a kind of dead end and will just be the seeking of pleasure, and rather than the idea that, no, we're made to seek after truth, and then we're made to conform to truth when we find it, and this is something that no one has a monopoly on. We need one another to discover the truth, to have discourse. This is where freedom of speech now comes in. So you have to have first freedom of mind, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, then freedom of discourse. And this is, when men are at their best, this is what men do.
I agree. And I don't want to say but to this. I want to say but. I want to add something to it. Namely, what was the great rallying cry of the French Revolution? Enlightenment: liberty, equality, fraternity. But liberty can be interpreted in different ways. If it really means I can do whatever I choose,
right,
that's licentiousness. That's libertinism. It's
right.
not liberty.
Right.
But liberty is the faculty we have. Freedom is the fact we have to choose what is our good, which is objectively set before us. We have a right, we can freely choose that. But if you have liberty in a vacuum, where it's simply a matter of will or choice, or, like the pro-choice movement. What does that mean, pro-choice? I'm not pro-choice in the sense of whatever you choose is okay. I'm pro-truth, I'm pro-goodness, I'm pro-beauty, that, yes, I'm for choice when we adapt our choices, we mold our choices to what is best for us and for society.
Right, but the point here, I think, is that people need to have the liberty to seek after truth. If you
yes.
But Christians, and on page 292, he says, the role of Christians in society is to what? Attest to the fact that man is capable of perceiving truth, and that this ability sets a limit to all power. Right? It's the Christian who stands up and says, no, it's not just a vacuum. There's something out there to be discovered, something out there to be conformed to that makes for a flourishing society. And it's Christians who attest to the existence of truth, which a lot of people right now think there is no truth.
By the way, you were quoting Carlos Serra, who at the time was quoting Karl Ratzinger.
Aha, yay!
In his book, Values in a Time of Upheaval, which you can find at your local Catholic bookstore, I hope, or if not, at ignatius.com, where we have many books by Karl Ratzinger. And you can see in this whole book, Carlos Serra is greatly indebted to Pope Benedict, Karl Ratzinger,
yes,
for his thinking, and he quotes him copiously.
So now that we've discussed religious liberty, do we want to go to the end of the book and wrap things up here? Because this is about, okay, if you're going to practice religion, this is what it's got to look like.
All right.
If we're going to restore this society, this is what we have to do.
Let's do that. Go ahead. Where do you want to start?
Well,
part 4.
Chapter 17.
Okay. God opens his hand.
Yep.
To slap us on the face. We might be able to do that once in a while.
Yeah.
As our friend John Galton says here in San Francisco, if God doesn't intervene and do something, he owes an apology to Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway.
Oh gosh. John Galton, what a great man. Yeah. Well, he starts with where he began. That we first have to be willing to receive from God. We first have to be willing to acknowledge there's a creator. We don't make ourselves. And to receive from God what he wants to give us. Anyone calling them a religious person, that's where you have to start. He's God, you're not.
Well, I would like from that chapter as well, because obviously this is a favorite of mine. It's obviously a favorite of Cardinal Serra, and I'm happy to dovetail and accentuate. Page 306. He quotes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Liechtenstein address, which is even better than his Harvard address, about self-limitation. So this is, I in contrast call for joyous self-limitation. This is the Cardinal's words. 1993 in his Liechtenstein address, Alexander Solzhenitsyn remarked, and this is Solzhenitsyn. The time is urgently upon us to limit our wants. It is difficult to bring ourselves to sacrifice and self-denial because in political, public, and private life, we have long since dropped the golden key of self-restraint to the ocean floor. But self-limitation is the fundamental and wisest step for a man who has obtained his freedom. We can only experience true spiritual satisfaction, not in seizing, but in refusing to seize. In other words, in self-limitation. To limit ourselves is the only true path of preservation for us all, and it helps bring back the awareness of our whole and higher authority above us and the altogether forgotten sense of humility before this entity, which is absolutely a beautiful encapsulation of what's wrong and what needs to be put right.
Is Solzhenitsyn a convert to Christianity?
Yes, he's a convert to Russian Orthodoxy. Just about the time he got out of prison, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the expectation of imminent death did its job. And he was he became a believing Russian Orthodox back then, as the early 50s, early 1950s, and then remained a believer for the remainder of his life.
Well, I love this expression, joyous self-limitation, because, you know, the most unhappy child is a spoiled child.
Yes.
Spoiled children are not happy people.
All children of all ages. I mean, and I think that's the question here, though, that if you do your own thing, first thing you're doing is limiting the freedom of others, right? Licentiousness is all doing our own thing and everyone being happy. You know, it's I'm doing my own thing, which I'm going to basically screw everybody else's life up, and in order to gratify myself, right? Which means you're ruining everybody else in order to have your freedom. Which, in other words, you're actually destroying other people's freedom to have your own. And what's the consequence? You become an addict to your lifestyle, which means you're not even free yourself. There are no freedoms involved here. They're all different forms of slavery.
I want to approach Joseph says, I know you have your many activities which you have to help bring income to support your family and your lifestyle, even though it's a self-limited lifestyle. But I think you might want to start producing some bumper stickers. And I think that Carlos Sarah has some terrific phrases which we could use for bumper stickers.
That is true, yes.
On page 307.
Bringing out the entrepreneurial spirit in me, Father.
Exactly right. on the page 307 at the bottom, he has two of them here. One of them is, Jesus tells us we're the salt of the earth, not the sugar of the earth. And then below that, the Lord did not ask us to have no enemies, but to love them. That's a great expression there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was a young Jesuit, many years ago, and I began this program at the University of San Francisco, and I was opposed by my Jesuit brothers. Although I expected help from them, I was really discouraged. I was very discouraged. I used to run down to the beach thinking, what's going on? What's going on? And finally I realized, wait a minute. I'm presupposing they're my friends and expecting help. But they're not my friends, they're my enemies. Now I can love them.
Oh.
And it gave me great spiritual freedom to realize that they're my enemies, they're hostile to me. So okay, I'll love them.
Well, then he moves on to the need for fortitude.
Okay.
Because if you're going to limit yourself and if you're going to cultivate virtue, you know, you're going to need to get some fortitude, right? But I love the way he exhorts first the family and then priests in slightly different ways about the fortitude, you know, the fortitude it takes to be parents of a family.
Read that, because I had that underlined too. You got the whole page underlined.
I know, I got the whole.
in the first part.
Yeah, so but I just love the way he says, stand firm, cling to the faith, by your fidelity to Christ's teaching about the married couple and the family, by your signs of everyday love, you are sowing seeds of hope. Well, they're helping too. Yeah. Seeds of hope. And then he says, priests, you know, don't abandon the tradition of the church. Don't give in to confused talk. Hold fast to doctrine. Pray intensely. Look at Christ and not at the violence of the wind. Meaning in the boat, you know, the apostles were afraid, seeing the violence of the wind. They thought the boat was going to sink. But
now you've spoken to us priests. Let me speak to you family people. Before that, here.
Right.
On this earth, martyrdom is no longer confined to Muslim countries. It takes a lot of fortitude to be the father or the mother of a family nowadays. Let me repeat that. This is on page 309. It takes a lot of fortitude to be the father or the mother of a family nowadays. It takes true magnanimity, that virtue which drives us to do great things in order to embark on the adventure of a Christian family. I want to tell all Christian parents that they are the glory of the church in the 21st century. Your witnesses to someone said any martyrdom. That's beautiful.
Yeah. It is. And it's true, too. Being parents is
and then, okay, on page
hard work.
On 310 now, after he quotes Benedict, he says, we've arrived at an era in which the world unceasingly solicits our complicity with falsehood. Christian fortitude is the strength of the truth and the strength of our faith, the strength of God's love, which has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, has been given to us. Truth is the milieu in which faith and love are experienced authentically. Here's the sentence. This is why we must create little islands of truth. Each Christian family, each school, each parish must become a little island in which all falsehood is banished. So this is kind of the Benedict option, but he's not saying we should leave the world or not engage in the world, but we have to have islands of truth. Little islands of truth in the midst of the world. Family, parish, our friends, and our society. Yeah.
Then you have some place to invite someone in. You know, if you are reaching out to someone who doesn't share your faith and they begin to be interested well, the next step is to try to bring them in. Well, bring them into what? If you don't have a family, you don't have a parish, you don't have a little island of truth, you can invite them into. They're just sort of left out in the cold.
Onward to chapter 18. We will conclude this with this session. This is like session 14, I think. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
But chapter 8, finally, we have the question, what must we do? And then Nicolas Dia, the interlocutor here, asks this question, your diagnosis seems very somber. Are you not lacking in hope? And so he has a whole chapter on hope, which I highly recommend.
I love the statement, hope is a constant combat. You know, we often think of the virtues, faith, hope, and charity as something that, well, they're gifts, right? I've never been given the gift of faith. Have you heard somebody say that before?
Yeah.
You know, and these virtues are a struggle to obtain. They're gifts of God, yes, and then they're a struggle to keep and to practice. So hope is what you practice in the face of despair. Charity is what you practice in the face of a lack of love. Faith is what you practice in the face of doubt. All of these things are a constant struggle. Don't you think, Joseph?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not the end of the book, and it's not going to be the end of the book, but it could be the end of the book, in the sense that, this is again, Georges Diat. Is it Diat? Do you pronounce the T, Father? You're the French expert.
Yeah, last syllable, Diat.
Diat. Okay. Well, again, he quotes here another favorite of mine. Obviously, I'm
I knew you'd read that. Go ahead.
Page 319. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite. In fact, the first book by Chesterton I ever read, The Well and the Shallows. And I think this really sums it up. The bottom line. As I listen to you, says Georges Diat, I am reminded of the remark by G.K. Chesterton. Quote, I could not abandon the faith without falling back on something more shallow than the faith. I could not cease to be a Catholic except by becoming something more narrow than a Catholic. We have come out of the shallows and the dry places to the one deep well, and the truth is at the bottom of it.
That's great.
You can buy the book, The Well and the Shallows, at Ignatius.com. I mean, you can't read too much of Chesterton. On the previous page, after Vivian, you talked about how hope is a challenge and so on, and we're all kind of, infirm here. Another great little statement. The liturgy is a hope treatment. The liturgy is, we're sick, but we need hope. Where do we go for help? The liturgy is a hope treatment. It revives our desire for God and at the same time already satisfies it. At the bottom of the page, hope must be the virtue that makes us smile like a child when we are alone against everyone. I mean, that's sort of a poignant.
And Father, moving on the theme of bumper stickers.
Yes.
How about this for another Cardinal Swab bumper sticker? Page middle of 325. We must speak about God, not to impose him, but to propose him.
Right.
Yeah, but that's a pretty well-worn phrase. I've heard that before.
Oh, really? New to me.
Okay. Well, let's see here. Moving towards the end, we spent 13 sessions on the bad news. Part of one session.
I love 328, Father, when he talks about, after the quote from who else, Benedict XVI, he says, Cardinal Soir says, we cannot speak about charity unless we start with the heart of Jesus. Charity is not an emotion. Charity is a participation in the love with which God loves us, in the love that is manifested in the sacrifice of the Mass. When Christians hear the word charity, they think of giving little money to the poor or to a charitable organizations. It's about much more than that. Charity is the blood that courses through the heart of Jesus. Charity is the love that gives itself to the point of death.
You know, in each of these theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, he's used this word participation. When we exercise these virtues, we are participating in God's life. And that's definitely what makes life worth living.
And absolute practical things here as well. 329. Absolutely practical. It is urgent and vital to ask ourselves how much time we spend before the Eucharistic Jesus present in the tabernacle. A parish in which there is no adoration of the Blessed Sacrament is a dead parish or a sick one.
Tell us what you really think, Cardinal. So, I think this concludes our discussion of this wonderful book by a wonderful man of the Church. Next week, we'll begin, Joseph, with what?
Oh, it's there, look.
Look at that.
Rethinking Mary in the New Testament. It's a jointly published book by Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute, by Edward Street, one of the finest theologians out there. So we'll begin that discussion in next week's book club. And if you want to give a reading assignment, just quickly look at the contents. And let's aim for the first 6 chapters.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Vivian. God bless you all. We will see you